Hey, Sales Hacker community. This is Sydney Abrams, Sales Hacker's Partner Marketing Manager. And today we have a wonderful webinar for you sponsored by Gong titled 7 Ways to Ramp New Sellers Lightning Fast. We're super excited for it. And just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. This webinar will be recorded and we will send it to you after we finish. The deck will also be available on our SlideShare account, so be sure to check in there. And we will be answering questions throughout this, so be sure to use the Q&A feature in your Zoom panel, and we will get to them as they're appropriate and when we have time. So, Chris, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction there, Sydney. So my name's Chris. I run product marketing over here at Gong. And my friend Gaetano was actually planning on being on this webinar with me, but it looks like he ran into a few hiccups as far as getting back to his building. So he may chime in at some point during this webinar. We'll wait for him to pop in, but the show must go on. I'm very excited to talk about the topic we have today, though, which is 7 ways to ramp new sellers lightning fast. And the reason I'm so excited to talk about this is I have taken a pretty active role in our own onboarding over at Gong. And I realized just how big the knowledge gap is between somebody who's been working at a company for a few years and is responsible for imparting their knowledge and skills and processes and domain knowledge to new hires. It's really changed my perspective on how you should approach onboarding. But with that said, we'll get into it. We'll see if Gaetano jumps in and interrupts me. So I would be thrilled because him and I vibe pretty well together. But like I said, show must go on, so let's get into it. So one of the points I want to make before we get into the specific 7 tips is kind of sell everybody on the importance of onboarding. I'm guessing if you're on this webinar, you don't totally need to be sold on that because you're already interested in the topic, but there does need to be a nuanced point made that onboarding, if you do it right, it can actually be a revenue generating activity. It can be a profit center rather than a cost center. And so what we're looking at here is a GIF on repeat of the different scenarios that happen when you ramp a new seller fast or faster than the other scenarios. So we have a 5-month ramp, we have a 6-month ramp, and we have a 7-month ramp time. And by the way we're defining ramp in this scenario is time to quota. Not time to first deal, although I would recommend you measure that, but time, the months it takes for a new seller to operate at full quota consistently. And you can see it's pretty straightforward, but some people just haven't made the connection that if you get somebody producing quota sooner, in 5 months in this case, rather than 6 or 7 months, you are going to have more revenue on the books come December 31st. And if you're hiring a lot of reps, that revenue gain becomes exponential. You're multiplying that across every new seller you're able to reduce onboarding ramp time for. So the point of this is onboarding is a revenue driving activity. It is not just a table stakes program that new hires go to learn about the company's background and market knowledge and get people just up and running to do the basics of their job. If you do it right, boot camp, extended onboarding, and even coaching after onboarding are revenue driving activities and should be treated as such. So let's get into some of the specific ways that you can actually do that. The 7 ways that I've seen that we've used over here at Gong, and we've seen some of our customers use to ramp new sellers lightning fast, get them to full quota sooner, and generate more revenue as a result. So this is just kind of filler slide. Straight up, do not have talking points for this, so I will just skip over it, except that there are a few places to focus on, which is demo, if you're a SaaS company. If you're not a SaaS company, that would be sales presentations. You have to know product knowledge, sales skills. I would argue there are a few other elements to onboarding and knowledge gaps to fill that go beyond these, such as domain knowledge, and buyer knowledge, and what have you. But let's go ahead and get into it. So the first tip and the most impactful tip, especially if you're ramping account executives rather than SDRs, people who marshal deals from first call to close throughout the entire sales process, is allowing them to view and listen and to see a full sales cycle. So that's one of the major problems that I have with call shadowing. because call shadowing is kind of, the way I think about call shadowing is it's like a random act of onboarding. So in marketing, we have this name for, we have this phrase we use called random acts of marketing, where you're just kind of, ad hoc doing things and hoping something works. And that's how I view call shadowing when it comes to onboarding, because reps are going to be able to see one call here and another call there, but it's typically disjointed rather than seeing the duration of an entire sales cycle. So what we're looking at here is the activity map of a sales cycle, which includes all of the calls, all of the meetings, all of the emails. And if you give your rep access to all of this for them to learn from, whether it's through recorded calls and captured emails, or some other method like shadowing a deal from first call to close instead of just shadowing a bunch of random calls, they're going to have a much broader view for how the sales cycle should be executed, compared to this little narrow sliver that we're looking at, which is how much knowledge they tend to gain from shadowing just one call. So you can see how many different nuances would be left out if you're not shadowing a full sales cycle from first call to close. You're just getting a sliver of that sales cycle, and you're probably going to learn some interesting things for that specific scenario. But there's just so much left out of the learning equation if you're not enabling new sellers to view full sales cycles, ideally on demand. Okay, very related to tip number 2, or tip number 1 rather, is showing your reps what good looks like at each stage of the sales cycle and in each type of selling scenario that you expect them to encounter. So this one goes beyond just letting them view a full sales cycle. It's not really stage specific. It is scenario specific. So what does a good objection handling scenario look like? What does a good discovery call look like? What does a good competitive response snippet sound like, look and sound like? And one of the best ways to do this is to simply record calls, find the winners, crowdsource some calls from your highest performing reps, and then put the winning clips of those calls into dedicated libraries. So if you do this for a while, you're eventually going to accumulate some very useful knowledge for new sellers to learn from. And you'll have multiple examples as far as call recordings or email templates that reps have sent to address each selling scenario that new sellers are expected to confront. Because that's really what's going through a new seller's mind, especially if they're an account executive, is how do I talk? How do I talk in different scenarios during the sales cycle? What do I say? How do I respond? There are so many different scenarios. There are 30 objections that could come up. There are multiple competitors. There are different ways to conduct discovery. And based on how discovery goes, there are different ways to conduct a demo. How do I negotiate? And what are the nuances of our sales cycle that are not generalized to other sales positions that I've had in the past? Every sales process has its own specific nuances. And it's very impactful if you can capture those nuances through either a call recording or other means and kind of memorialize them, have them as this library that new hires can start learning from on day 1. Okay, so I've already kind of alluded to this. I've been talking about it really the entire presentation so far, but it's enabling new hires to learn on demand. So what do I mean by that? The opposite of learning on demand to me is call shadowing, really. It is a new seller comes on board, maybe they go through a 2-week boot camp, and the next stage of their ramp progression is shadowing their more experienced peers, their veteran peers, their tenured peers. And what ends up happening is they schedule a call with one of their peers, and first of all, it's several days out because it's really hard to line up calendars. And if they do line up calendars, maybe your top rep's putting on a show in front of 5 or so new hires, but that's pretty much it. Now they have to schedule the next one, and 5 days are going to go by, and within your first 30 days or 60 days or 90 days of a new seller's lifetime at your company, they've only been able to shadow a small handful of calls. And so learning on demand is the opposite of that. The best way I know how to help new sellers learn on demand is record all of these calls that you're expecting them to shadow after boot camp and enable them to kind of binge on those within their first, couple days on the job. They can kind of learn at their own pace. So this is what that looks like. This is several weeks over an onboarding period. I'm tripping over my words today. And up at the top here, we have what the onboarding scenario or the ramping scenario looks like for a new seller if they're reliant on call shadowing. And you can see these little yellow dots. There's a lot of space between them, and we only end up with 5 or so calls shadowed in the first 4 weeks. However, on the bottom here, we have a scenario where a new seller is learning on demand, and maybe they're using recorded calls to do it. And you can see within just their first couple days, they've already listened to 5 calls, which is the entirety of what they would be able to shadow in the above scenario. And you can see as time progresses, they're listening to more and more calls, learning more and more from on-demand learning resources. And a rep that goes through this bottom scenario at week 4 is going to absolutely knock it out of the park compared to the rep in the above scenario in the yellow here. Okay, tip number 4, crowdsource your training content. You'll notice here that there's a few common themes to this presentation. One of them is learning on demand, and another one is recording calls. I'm a huge believer that recording calls through any means you have, whether it's something like Zoom and you're just recording your web conferencing meetings, something like Gong, or you're making calls through something like Outreach, giving new sellers a repository or bank of call recordings is an incredibly effective way to get new sellers up to speed. And the reason is almost everything a new seller needs to learn during their ramp period can be found in frontline sales conversations. How to handle objections, buyer and market knowledge, how to demo and do discovery, and how to run a sales process. And so when I say crowdsource your training content, what I mean there is you should record your superstar salespeople, what they do in specific scenarios, and then just use that as onboarding training content. Set up an onboarding training with your new sellers and go through several of these recordings. And that has a few benefits. First of all, it ramps your new sellers fast. That's the table stakes benefit. That's the entire point of this presentation. But the less obvious benefit is, number 1, you have to build less training content. So having built a lot of onboarding training content myself, you have to create 40 slide decks that become outdated within a couple months. And it's incredibly labor intensive. You have to create a deck for how to do discovery or demo and a bunch of these other scenarios and market knowledge. And crowdsourcing your training content to your best reps by recording their calls is not going to eliminate that entirely. You still have to go through a lot of that, but it is going to significantly ease the burden of your content development for your onboarding program. The second benefit of this is if you're continually recording calls and you're reviewing them and kind of updating your bank of calls or your library, is you continually have up-to-date, fresh content. So a big problem with onboarding training content that you make yourself is, like I said, it becomes outdated very quickly. And you have to continually update it every time you have a new onboarding cohort. You have to go through all this and make sure it's still up to date. Are your buyer personas in check? Is your sales process and selling motion, does that need to be updated? Whereas if you're capturing conversations of your top sellers and using those as demonstrations for your new hires, and you're doing that on an ongoing basis, it's automatically kept up to date, which significantly reduces your workload.
Hey, Chris, how often should this be refreshed, be updated? Is there like a certain cadence that you recommend?
Well, hello, Gaetano. I didn't hear you come in.
Hello. Yeah, I've been sitting here quietly, just letting you do your thing, man. Sorry, I was a little bit late to the webinar, but yeah, the question came in my chat. How often should this be like refreshed or updated? So I was just wondering if you had a good cadence.
So first of all, very good to hear your voice. Glad you could make it. Sorry you had a couple hiccups getting here, but I think we just made this webinar a lot more interesting with you from the door.
Oh, yeah.
Mainly the combination of me and you, I think, put us in a room and you've got something interesting. Anyway, to answer the question, I think that's going to depend on your market, your category maturity, and just your company in general. So here's an example. Gong, back in the day, 2 years ago, we had to update and refresh this stuff all the time because we were kind of an early stage startup. We were still learning a lot about our buyer personas, about our market, how to sell to them, all of this stuff. We really didn't have everything figured out at the time. And because of that, every time we hired like a new cohort of people, we had learned so much in just like 30 days that we had to update all this stuff. And we ended up just using call recordings as an onboarding tool. On the contrary, if you work for like a big company who's just an execution machine or in execution mode, you're not really learning anything new. You don't expect to be learning anything new, then you have to update it significantly less often. So the big point I would come away is think about the maturity of your company, the maturity of the category, and just how often you need to refresh this stuff based on what you're learning about your market. Have you already learned just about everything there is to know, or are you still figuring things out?
Yeah, I would agree.
Any thoughts to bounce off there, G?
No, I think it's great. I think you already nailed it, man. The big problem is that these companies get their training materials and training content as good as it gets to a certain point, and they never think about, let me refresh it, because refreshing it and updating it and auditing it is a massive headache. It's a lot of work. And a lot of times people, they just get into churn and burn mode, and then they forget that their training content is like stale. They never prioritize it. And then before you know it, it's like onboarding just becomes this go through the motions thing.
Yeah, go through the motions. I have seen that more times than I care, not at Gong, but in other companies that I've observed. Just kind of like a side anecdote, one of the ways we do that here is we have every time, because I run product marketing, so I've got to do a lot of buyer persona interviews and customer interviews. And every time I do one of those, I record it and I put it into an onboarding library for new hires to learn about our buyer personas. And every time I have a new buyer persona interview, which I usually do like 3 to 5 times a month, if it went really good or if I feel like there's new learnings, I'll add it to that library and I'll maybe like start removing some of those that are from, a couple of years ago or something like that. Okay, tip number 5. As a demand generation guy, Gaetano, I'm sure this one will resonate with you very strongly, but it is continually measured. So I know of a couple sales organizations back in my motherland of Utah who do onboarding exceptionally well. And the reason they do it exceptionally well is they treat every onboarding class essentially as its own campaign, where they document everything the new sellers went through during onboarding. They create a campaign for that onboarding class in Salesforce so that they can track the start date and the end date and the time to full quota. And they measure all of their onboarding classes month over month. Or they compare every... I said that wrong. They compare every onboarding class against each other, which each onboarding class starts every month, and they'll kind of tweak different parts of their onboarding program until they've really got it optimized. So I know one company in Utah, I can't even remember what the crazy number was, but like over a 2-year period that they ended up decreasing their ramp time for enterprise account executives by somewhere around 33%, which if you have an 18-month or 12-month ramp time for a new enterprise account executive, if you can shave a few months off of that, that's huge money, because those people typically bring in the big bucks. So as far as setting that up, there's a lot of art that's beyond the scope of this webinar. There's, go talk to your Salesforce admin, go Google around. I'm sure there are a ton of articles. Doug Landis over at Emergence Capital, he actually knows how to do this pretty thoroughly. So it might be worth talking to him if you're not connected with him on LinkedIn. But what about you, Gaetano? What are your thoughts on measuring this kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, this is huge. One question that came in already was, could you rattle off a couple of ramp metrics that or not all of them, just maybe the top like one or two that like are critical to determining success?
Yeah, the top two that come to my mind are time to full quota, time to first deal. There are a few other ones. The time to full quota needs to be unpacked a little bit because depending on how you have your quota structure set, not everybody is going to attain full quota even when they are ramped. So I'm trying to pull back into my memory here, but I think one company I talked to measured that metric where it was like time to achieving 80% quota quarter over quarter for 3 quarters in a row or something like that, because they didn't their quotas were pretty high. They didn't expect necessarily the majority of their sales force to attain full quota or exceed full quota. So I also think that's going to depend on your sales process too, because if you've got a really long sales process, that usually means that there's less predictability and hence less quota attainment across your entire sales force. Whereas like if you have a 30-day sales cycle, you can pretty much predict what quota attainment is going to be rep to rep. But there's huge variance for account executives that have a 9-month sales cycle versus account executives that are maybe selling to small businesses and only have like a 15 or 30-day sales cycle.
Agreed. And I love the tip of dividing new hires into clear cohorts for easy comparison. This came up on a webinar on Tuesday with Rob Jepson. You know, one of the struggles with sales coaching and sales training, and this directly relates to onboarding, is that too many organizations are kind of stuck in the Stone Ages with basically just being binary. Rep hits quota or does not hit quota, but you know, there's basically ways to segment that into manageable chunks. So like you said, 80% of quota attainment might be one way to do it depending on your sales cycle size. But there should be those buckets, or you should be breaking it up into manageable chunks so that a rep can eventually see how far away they are from getting to where they ultimately need to be versus where they are when they start.
Valuable insight.
Exactly.
So that actually leads me to another onboarding metric that I probably should have talked about when I was asked the question. And this one is less a lagging indicator and more of a leading indicator, but it is time to first demo. So we have seen, and here's the tip, let your reps demo sooner rather than later. We have seen time and time again, sales leaders just kind of gun shy about letting their new sellers actually get on the phone and start demoing the product because they think they're going to waste a bunch of at-bats, and they will. That is part of the point. They're going to get kicked in the teeth. There are going to be some opportunities that just don't go well because they were new. But we've seen time and time again, the shorter you can make the time window from first day to demo, the faster those reps are going to ramp over the long term, and therefore the more revenue they're going to pull in before your year ends. So I think there is an exception to this rule. I think if you have a very finite market, as in like your total addressable market is like less than 500 companies or something really small like that, or even smaller, like 1,000. I know some companies do that. Then I would be a little bit more gun shy about making sure your reps are really thoroughly trained, putting them through extensive role plays and demo certifications. Don't get me wrong, you should do all this stuff. You should do role plays and demo certifications and all those kind of precursor checkpoints before somebody actually gets on the call with a live one. But eliminating your gun-shy tendencies to let reps demo can really pay off over the long term, but there's going to be a little bit of pain short term because they are going to screw up some opportunities, but it just comes with the territory. These demos, these live at-bats are where the most important learning happens, and if you keep pushing that and deferring that into the future, you're really pushing out your ramp time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with this more. If I take this back to like a marketing parallel, imagine if when I had first started at Sales Hacker and Max was like, no, it's going to take you at least 3 months to get ramped before you can start talking to customers, publishing content. I think we need to really, put a nice little gate here before we let you run loose. Things wouldn't have turned up the way that they did, and it's no different in sales. I was just going to ask you, Chris, with a newer rep, let's say, they've been ramping for a while, they're about to get to a place where they're going to try their first demo. Should they be routed, dare do I say, lower quality leads or lesser value leads because let's say if they mess up or if something goes wrong or if shit hits the fan, that there's less of a blow, less of an impact? Do you feel like that is a good approach to be taking?
I can't think of a reason why that would be a bad idea. Maybe somebody in the audience can point that out. But yes, I even though I'm a huge advocate that these new sellers should get into a quote unquote live buyer environment fairly quickly, if you have like a lead scoring mechanism that rates your leads as like A, B, C, or D or something like that, give them the C and D leads if they're coming in through qualified opportunities, and let them graduate into higher rated leads as they start to master the sales process. And by the way, don't get hung up on the word demo here. Every company is going to have their own equivalent to this, but decrease the time to conducting their first discovery call or giving their first sales presentation or just making their first cold call. Demo is just kind of a filler word here. The point is throw your troops out on the front lines and help them figure it out, or let them figure it out themselves rather after you've taught them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One thing I've seen as successful in the past is like letting new reps kind of rework leads that may have gone dry or gone dark. That's like a kind of a low pressure way of getting them kind of into the rhythm. But I couldn't agree with this more, dude. I really hope that's like in 2018 and beyond that sales managers, sales leaders across the world will recognize this and not be afraid to let their reps get those at bats.
Yeah, you just kind of have to accept that people are going to get kicked in the teeth. It's part of being in sales. But if you can handle the short-term pain, you'll get some long-term gain. And this is just kind of a projection of what happens when you do let reps demo sooner. So, if you defer time to first demo, which is the metric we're talking about, you defer time to revenue in most cases. It's simple math.
Awesome.
Okay, tip number 7. We are coming to the end here, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. So this tip is designed to address the gap between onboarding and post-onboarding. And that is to help your reps cross the chasm of from going to new hire to like veteran sales rep who's producing quota. You need to coach them against a consistent framework. So, once they're ramped or they're starting to get into the groove of things need to start being reinforced, because this is really how you scale. And I'm assuming the majority of people listening to this or watching this webinar are in a situation where they're either scaling or will be scaling soon, because ramping new hires is very central to that task. And putting this consistent coaching framework in place is going to be like the missing piece from ramping new reps to actually scaling those new reps and scaling many new reps. So you have to really standardize everything you do, from how you open calls and setting an upfront contract, to how you conduct discovery, to how you conduct a demo based on how discovery went, to how you marshal deals through a sales process from first touch to close. And the best way to help standardize on everybody against this is not even just for your new sellers, but for your veteran sellers. You should have a standardized coaching framework that you occasionally put them through as checkpoints to make sure they're following these processes. And I'm not talking about a script here. We're professional communicators. We are not, college people trying to pay their bills and are expected to follow a word-for-word script. But there does need to be some sort of standardization as far as your sales process goes at a higher level, or else it's going to be an absolute nightmare as you scale. Everybody's going to be doing their own thing. You're going to hire more and more reps. Leads are going to come to assist into your revenue generation system, and few will make it out because you just don't have this consistent way to process them into closed revenue. The right way to do this is to create call scorecards for different stages in your sales process: prospecting calls, discovery calls, demos, et cetera, and just make sure reps are hitting kind of the high-level checkpoints for each of those selling scenarios or stages of your sales process.
Yeah, I love that tip, man. That was another thing that came up on an earlier webinar this week. It's like so many sales coaching or sales training sessions like kind of just get misconstrued as sales management, where like you just go in and you look at a bunch of dashboards and metrics and KPIs, and It's like, well, you're not hitting this. You came close to hitting this. You came close to hitting that. You hit this. Good job. But there's not on the activity side of that a way to ignite change on the activities or the behaviors. So would you say that the coaching framework you're mentioning here kind of covers both sides, the activities and the metrics?
Yeah. I think, I didn't initially intend for it to cover the activity side or the metric side. I was more thinking like the qualitative side, but that's an obvious oversight on my part. So I'm glad you brought that up. And it actually reminds me of kind of just something in my personal life. For the last, I don't even know, 5 years or so, every Sunday night, I set weekly goals for myself, both in my personal life and my professional life. And I usually have 5 to 7 weekly goals in each of those categories. And what I found is that I would kind of let myself off the hook for a lot of those goals because there was not like some sort of rating system. And I just recently discovered this. I would, if my goal was to not drink at all for a week, for example, and maybe I let myself slip and like have a glass of wine on Thursday, then I just ultimately failed that goal and I abandoned it. And, the rest of the week just goes downhill from there. However, what I've tried lately, which applies very closely to what we're talking about here, is I set these goals as I usually have, and then the following Sunday morning, I rate myself on a scale of 1 to 10 as far as how much I think I attained that goal. That way the goals are not all or nothing. I can give myself a score of 8 out of 10 or something like that. But I also have this kind of standardization that I'm expected to meet. I'm going to be rating myself at the end of the week, and I know that. If you can figure out how to apply something similar into the way you ramp new sellers and the way you continually train and coach veteran sales reps, you are going to see that 1% improvement per day accumulate over a long period of time, and you're going to wake up in a market leadership position in a couple of years.
Yeah, it's the aggregation of marginal gains, man. It's a big deal.
Yeah, compound interest at its finest.
Exactly. All right, we do have a question for you, Chris. It's from another Chris in the audience. He says, all right, it's kind of a long one. He says that he helps facilitate and run a 3-month ramp for BDRs. Okay. He says that he goals them based on activity types, which might range from personal emails to mail merge, dials, along with SQLs, appointments, things of that nature. So those are kind of like all the basic things. But then he also says that one thing that he notices with regard to ramping reps is that there's like a little extra 10% that's like hard to measure. And he kind of like says that extra 10% of things falls into the category of hacking, or sales hacking, or growth hacking. Some examples of this might be leveraging Zoom info, flipping warm email engagements into appointments, email validation hacks. So I guess the main question is, how do you measure, monitor, and implement hacks that make fully ramped reps great long term? And how can you step outside of like the traditional ramp stuff and say like, hey, this one superstar rep has found like a couple of secret hacks or whatever that seem to be working really well. Should that kind of be incorporated into the ramp process as well, or should it just be really blocking and tackling the bare essentials? What's your viewpoint on that?
So I'll give as qualified an answer as I can do, and then I'll also kind of flip the script toward the end and suggest there's another question that should be asked within that question. So the first thing is, I actually do not see that as an onboarding imperative. I see that as you want to spread tribal knowledge from rep to rep, whether they're currently being onboarded or whether they've been at your company for 10 years. And so you shouldn't really, I wouldn't say shouldn't, but I would say I wouldn't necessarily include that in like boot camp or like a systematic onboarding program unless you feel like you can consolidate all of those and keep them up to date. But it seems kind of like a headache to me. To me, the first thing that would come to mind is like get all of your BDRs in a room like once a month and just have a brainstorming session about all of these hacks. And that's a great way to just spread tribal knowledge. If everybody's in the same room and they're just kind of shouting what they do to, get email addresses from this crazy website or, hack this over here. And I would just try to get everybody in a room, kind of create a culture of like, we're a mastermind and we're sharing ideas with each other, and just share all of that stuff on like a monthly basis or so. So that's the first answer I'll give. The second answer I'll give is I would say, based on how the question was asked, I think there is a very big missing piece in onboarding for those BDRs or SDRs. Because yes, you should look at activity benchmarks and metrics, but what I have seen in other companies who do that without getting insight into how the BDRs are conducting their communications, whether it's emails or calls, is they end up just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall because they're expected to make 60 dials a day and send 30 emails a day, but they don't really know what to say or how to have these conversations. So they just kind of make stuff up and hope it works, and it takes them a very long time to start bringing in qualified opportunities at a consistent pace. So the suggestion I would have is that I would actually prioritize how effective your BDR's communications are over these standardized activity metrics. Make sure they know your buyer's pain points thoroughly. What keeps them up at night? They'll never ask that question. What keeps them up at night? What are their pain points? What are their frustrations? And what are they trying to achieve? And then help them craft either a call structure or an email structure to be able to speak to that stuff resonantly, and then coach against it in terms of like a scorecard or some other type of framework. So that's what hopefully that's not too long of an answer. Hopefully that's helpful though.
I agree. Like, I think the term hacking has gotten really sexy lately. Sean Ellis pioneered it, obviously, but, everybody wants to growth hack because it insinuates that there's like a shortcut or a way to automate a lot of stuff, or a secret thing that's like ahead of the curve that everyone else doesn't know.
Right.
It's really hard to measure like the effectiveness of those kinds of tactics. Like, for example, it could even just be a process thing, like automating LinkedIn. There's a lot of ways to do that with plugins and stuff. But like you said, that shouldn't be part of the staple requirements of the onboarding. I love the idea of just getting all the BDRs in a room once a month and just talking through what's working, what's not working. That's beyond the scope of the blocking and tackling.
Well, yeah.
We do something about sharpening the saw every month, and it's like essentially serving that purpose. So I'm very much aligned with your take on that, Chris.
Yeah, and imagine if you had, a bunch of BDRs that had like the best little hacks in the world for finding email addresses and all that kind of stuff, and they had all these like interesting tricks and techniques, but they all suck at talking on the phone, or they all suck at writing emails. You're still going to just have a mess of a BDR team. So you really need to get the blocking and tackling down first, as unsexy as it is, and then focus on that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Also a question for you, Chris, from Zach Lockhart. This might be a tricky one. Feel free to answer it as best as you can, but it says, what are your thoughts on cadence softwares such as Outreach or SalesLoft? Doesn't that solve much of the communication variance? What are your thoughts there?
I would say that does not take a stride in solving any sort of communication variance. I think it makes reps more productive and efficient, which is what those tools, as great as both of them are, that's what they're designed to do. It does not automatically impart the domain knowledge about your buyers that your reps would need to communicate crisply with them. So, I mean, that's about all I'll say about it. Those are tremendous tools. I think every SDR or BDR organization should be using one of them.
Yeah.
But the problem they are designed to address has nothing to do with, effectiveness. It's efficient.
Yeah. I agree. I would also say it depends on your sales cycle. If you're inside sales and the deal cycles are very short, how much can you really pound a lead if like the deal size is like 10 days?
Yeah.
How much can you really pound it sequencing and the automation of the cadence there. But if it's very long, then you might have more creative ways and creative opportunities to be omni-channel. You might do a mix of phone, email, social, whatever. But I think it comes back to depending on how your buyers are going through the sales cycle.
Yeah, and I'm guessing the question came from, well, what if I can just dictate what these emails sound like as the sales leader myself, and segment them and just have my SDRs, run these cadences based on the messaging I came up with. The first thing I would say is, why do you need SDRs if that's the approach you're going to take?
Yeah, exactly.
Use marketing automation. But the second thing is you're going to sound just like everybody else, because there's no, hyper personalization to the specific pain points the buyer is experiencing.
Yeah,
that really needs to be there, but both personalization and relevance at the same time. One without the other is still not going to work.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm trying to every day, it seems like, whether it's in the community or even at work, I'm trying to change mindsets that, one click inject template into Salesforce, click and send, move on to the next. I'm trying to fight against that, because the success rates are nominal. No matter how much, you look at it, it's just the success rates of that tactic. It's just decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. It's amazing what happens when you take 3 to 5 minutes to research a prospect, mention something relevant, and then offer value. It's a night and day difference. We still have more questions coming in, Chris, if you don't mind.
We're pretty much at the end here, so let her rip.
Okay, awesome. Nico says he agrees personalization should be present in the emails. Definitely. Thanks, Nico. Appreciate you, man. All right, so this question is from John Reacher. What's up, John? He said, Chris, can you give an example of best use customer, and how is a best use customer using Gong as it relates to onboarding and the challenges that were solved?
Yeah, so I'll show you. I'll tell you a story, and then I'll show you a couple screenshots that maybe I have in this presentation.
Awesome.
We have a customer who, I'm not going to say their name because we are kind of in process of publishing this case study, and I don't want to be premature about telling everybody who it is, but they were hiring enterprise account executives. It took them 12 months on average to get those enterprise account executives up to speed, and they were hiring at a very fast rate. They were hiring a lot of these people.
What industry was that in, if you don't mind sharing?
It is quality management software. So it's a SaaS company.
Okay.
And so they have fairly complex sales cycles, and we ended up helping them reduce their time to full quota from 12 months to 9 months. And because they were hiring so many reps, that reduced time to full quota made $2.8 million in additional revenue that they were able to capture as a result of cutting that onboarding program. So there are a few ways that come to mind, and I'll go over to the next slide just to make it a little more clear. The first is that Gong is going to capture all of the conversations across an entire sales process, calls, emails, meetings, and that allows your new sellers to quote unquote shadow an entire sales process from first call to close, kind of on day one. They don't have to go through an entire sales process with a shadowed rep to do it, which could take 90 days. They can just go through all these communications on day one. And then the second way is something very simple, just libraries. Save your best calls or snippets of calls into different scenario-based libraries. So save your best discovery calls, save your best demos, save your best objection handling clips into these libraries. And that way, when new sellers come on board, day one, they can just binge on this stuff kind of on their own time. And they start learning how successful sales conversations happen, so that when they're done with boot camp, they're already ready. They're already ready to address frontlines. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to make this too much of a plug for Gong. I would highly recommend that if that resonated with you and if you asked the question, go see a demo.
Yeah.
Gong.io/demo. But as far as me,
Chris, those topics that are there, are you able to tag or categorize calls by topic, by function?
Yes. So it'll identify topics that were discussed within a call, and then it'll also identify through a Salesforce integration, when in the sales process did this call happen? Was it like a demo call or a discovery call, that kind of thing?
Gotcha. All right, awesome, man. This has been fantastic. Thanks again, Chris.
Yeah, this was fun. It was it was kind of unique, having you come in through the door halfway through, but we've done enough of these together that I would expect nothing less as far as, keeping me on my heels, and it was a blast as always.
Sorry, man. I know I made you sweat it out a bit, but folks, Chris, why don't you tell everybody where they can connect with you, how they can find you, and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, head over to LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Chris Orlob on planet Earth, at least to my knowledge. Hopefully I am, because it's a pretty unique name. Last name is spelled O-R-L-O-B. So just type into the search box on LinkedIn, Chris Orlob, O-R-L-O-B. Send me a connection request. Send me like an invite saying that you saw me on the webinar. I'll be faster to accept it if that's the case, because I'm starting to get a lot of just kind of weird connections these days.
Yeah.
But if you send that message, I'm very happy to connect with pretty much anybody.
Awesome. Also, Chris, Nico asked a question. He wants to know if you guys have a free trial.
We do have a pilot period, yes.
Okay.
So if you go through this, if you sign up for a demo like we have here on the screen and you talk to one of our account executives, we'll get you hooked up with the pilot.
Okay. Awesome, man. That's great. Well, dude, thanks again. This has been great. A lot of actionable insights. We all know that ramping reps is always and forever going to be a perennial challenge within sales. And thanks to the good folks at Gong, you guys are making it a lot easier for reps to get ramped up faster and ultimately hit that ramp to quota. So that's good stuff right there, Chris. And thank you again for being with us.
Pleasure as always, G.
All right. For everyone else on the webinar, thank you so much. If you go to Sales Hackers YouTube channel, you can subscribe there for the replay, and you also get an email follow-up. So thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.